Hello and welcome back to my craft room. Today I've got another project for our Inspired by Fairy Stories collaboration to show you. This one was inspired by the Little Mermaid. Let me show you. So this isn't the Little Mermaid. As you can see, she's not pretty anymore. This is actually going to be the Sea Witch from the Little Mermaid story. Underneath all of this is a Barbie doll, an actual Barbie, and if you'd like to see how I got to this point, I have videoed it. I've done a separate video with that. It's quite a long process, so I just did a lot of clips of all the stages. So if you're interested to see how that happened, follow the link I'll leave in the description box. But I will warn you that I can't say that no Barbies were harmed in the making of this doll. Parts of it are a little bit gruesome. I left out the most gruesome parts. Anyway, so I'm now at the stage where I'm ready to paint her. I've been really looking forward to this part. As I say, the original Barbie doll is the armature. Her legs are still inside this tail, and then I used air drying clay because I couldn't put the Barbie in the oven. So it's a little bit fragile. I'd rather have been able to use polymer clay. It cracked in places as it dried, you can see here. But either that will be covered by accessories and fabric and things, or as in this one across here and this one down here, I will make them into scars. After all, she is meant to be hundreds of years old, this Sea Witch, and that's why she hasn't got the perky Barbie bazookas anymore. I think she's lost some of her teeth as well, and yeah. And then when she's all painted, I've got this piece of one of my old paint bags. I've got another one to use here in a minute. So these start off as kind of a muslin that I use to strain a fruit with and things if I'm making jellies or that kind of thing, and then they get washed and they come out to my art room for a while and reused lots of times. And then eventually, once they get to this sort of stage, they're all lovely and soft, and they've got all these different colours. Sometimes they're really bright and colourful, sometimes they're darker like this, and I thought this would be perfect to drape somehow around my Sea Witch. And where I've got, you know, like this is too wide here, there are bits where I couldn't get it perfect. I can use the fabric to cover a multitude of sins as well as being a nice sort of a nice addition. I love the look of this fabric. And you couldn't buy fabric like this, you just have to wait for it to happen. Yeah, so I think that will give her a bit of drama as well as I say, covering a multitude of sins. But I need to give her a layer of paint first. That really does look, I wish I could show you it in real life. It looks better in real life. So I need to give her paint first. I was going to make tentacles and stuff in her hair, but in the end I just ended up putting PVA glue in her hair, and I like it just like that. I like the fact that it's still Barbie's hair, that it looks like, you know, because she was a mermaid. But this is my backstory for her. She was a beautiful mermaid herself once hundreds of years ago, and yeah, so she's still got the hair. And as part of the original story, Mermaid's hair does come into it, but I'm not going to spoil that, because when I get started painting, I will tell you the story of the Little Mermaid, the original version that Hans Christian Andersen wrote down. Parts of it are very dark, not at all like the Disney version. If you don't want to hear that, you'll have to mute it and listen to something else. So I'm going to start off with acrylic paints. I've got a tear off palette I'm going to use. I've got a couple of jars of water. Whoops, I've got a good range of brushes of different shapes and sizes, from a big one like that right down to a really fine one for tiny details. The colours I've pulled out, I've got this one I've not used before, but I got it because it was in a sale, and it's got a real, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, I think it does. It's got this, it's called Iridescent Pearl. The colour you see there is the actual colour of the paint. Possibly on its own or as a highlight, or mixed with some of the other colours, that will be a nice effect. I think she's going to look kind of pale and possibly slightly blue toned. Yeah, that's just how I imagine her. I've got some of this deep madder, which I won't use a lot of, but possibly like around her eyes and mouth. The tail and things are going to be blues, greens and silver, possibly with touches of copper. So I've got some different shades of blue. Processed blue, this is a light blue. I think it's probably too light, but I thought, well, I'll grab it. I've got a cobalt, And then I've got this brilliant purple. I'm not sure if I'll use all of that or not. And then I've got some Payne's grey, and I might just use that to do a kind of a wash with. When I come to do her tail, I've also got these Pebio Fantasy Effect paints. These are the moon ones, and they're made for dropping onto surfaces like little bezels and such like, so that they kind of pull together a little bit and then the effect happens as they dry. I bought these years ago. I've never used them. They're just sitting here being wasted, so I thought, well, I'll try using them to paint the tail, because I think they'll make a nice effect, even though they probably won't do the effect they're made for, because I won't be dropping them on that thickly. I'll be using them in a different way, but it's better than just wasting them. I did have a lot of the air drying clay that I used was Pebio as well, funnily enough, same make as the paints. So I might try making some little pendants or little bowls and things using the paints and things, and I'll do another video with that if that's the case. I've also got a few other things I might try out. So I've got this is called Perfect Effects. You can see this sort of pearly flakes, and I think they could look quite good as they're sort of semi-transparent almost, look quite good to give the effect of scales on her tail, I thought. I've got a couple of different embossing powders. These are both embossing powders. This is ultra thick, and this is a special effects one. So instead of it being a smooth powder like embossing powders usually are, it's got lots of bits in different colours, and this one's called Verdigris. So I think with the copper, little copper notes will look good against the blue, and the Verdigris would, yeah, so the whole blue, green and coppery thing. And then I've got this gold gilding paste that I've had for so many years, and you just put your finger in and rub it on. It picks up all the highlights, all the raised areas, and then you can buff it to make it shine. So that could be fun as well. So yeah, I'm just going to be experimenting with all of that, speeding through the process, and while I do that I will tell you the story of the Little Mermaid. It used to give me nightmares when I was a kid, but then I would go back and read it again. So I'm going to get my face out of the way so you can see what I'm doing and get painting. I've been so looking forward to this part, and then when the painting's all done I need to make her, I think she needs some strings of pearls. I think she'd have pearls being under the sea, because what she does is she gets paid for her services, for making her spells and things. So I think pearls and trinkets that people have found that have got lost from shipwrecks and things like that. So I'll make her some accessories like that, and I need to make her a little spell, a little potion bottle as well that she's holding. Her arms can still be moved about, but this is probably the position I'll mostly sit her in, because she's holding up the spell that she's made, and she's holding up her hands to do her incantation. One of her little fingers broke off, but there is an old story about people being given magical powers but having to sacrifice, and to have a bone broken, having to sacrifice something. So that could have been her sacrifice. So that's all part of her backstory now, and I might even thread the finger on that will become part of her necklace. Or I'll put it in the potion. So what you'll see now is a speeded up version of finishing off this sea witch. I hope you enjoy. The story of the Little Mermaid was written by Hans Christian Andersen and was first published in 1837. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Deep down at the bottom of the sea lived a sea king and his 6 beautiful daughters. The youngest of the princesses had the sweetest voice and eyes as blue as the ocean. She loved to hear her grandmother tell tales of the world above the sea, and looked forward to her 15th birthday, when she would be allowed to swim to the surface and see it all for herself. One by one, each of her sisters reached the age of 15 and rose to the surface to get a glimpse of the world above. They would return full of exciting stories of what they had seen, and the Little Mermaid couldn't wait for her turn to come. At last her 15th birthday arrived. Her grandmother helped her to dress for the occasion in all her finery, crowning her with a beautiful wreath of pearls. Then the Little Mermaid swam to the surface of the sea as fast as she could go. The sun had just gone down when she emerged, and straight away she saw a large ship and swam closer to see what she could see. A big celebration was going on, so the ship was full of lights and music and laughter. The Little Mermaid was fascinated by all the people, but most of all she was drawn to a handsome prince, and she just couldn't take her eyes off him. She sat on some rocks to watch, but a terrible storm blew up, and by morning the ship was completely wrecked. The prince was knocked unconscious and sank down into the sea, where he would have perished if it were not for the Little Mermaid. She remembered that humans couldn't live under the sea, so she rescued the prince and carried him safely to land. She left him near to a temple and waited to make sure that someone found him. A young woman came out of the temple by and by and took the prince inside, and the Little Mermaid turned away sadly and dived back down to her own home. Then night after night she returned to the place where she had left the prince, but she didn't see him again. She became very sad and withdrawn, and her sisters were worried about her. Eventually she confided in them, and they found out where the prince lived. The Little Mermaid was delighted and visited his home often after that, watching him from a distance and growing to love him more each day and yearning to be able to walk on land and be with him. Eventually she decided to visit the terrifying sea witch to see if she could give her what she wanted more than anything. The sea witch agreed to give the mermaid 2 legs instead of a tail, but warned her that every step she took would be agonising and that she would never be able to return to the sea again. She also told her that if the prince married another instead of her, her heart would break, and the very next day she would dissolve into sea foam and disappear forever. There was also a price to pay. In exchange for giving her legs, the witch would take her sweet voice by cutting out her tongue. The Little Mermaid agreed to all of this. So the sea witch cut out her tongue and gave her in exchange a noxious potion and some instructions. The Little Mermaid left her home without even saying goodbye and made her way to the surface once more. She found a spot on dry land near to where the prince lived and then swallowed the potion, whereupon her tail split into 2 human legs. Luckily the prince found her, took pity on her and brought her home to look after, but she couldn't tell him who she was because she was unable to speak. The prince was very kind and over time became very fond of her, but he didn't think of marrying her. Every evening the Little Mermaid would go down to the sea to bathe her sore feet. Sometimes her sisters would come close and watch her sadly. One day it was announced that a wife had been found for the prince, a princess from a neighbouring province. At first he was reluctant, but when they met he recognised her as the young woman who'd found him outside the temple after the storm, and he immediately fell in love with her. The Little Mermaid was heartbroken, for now she knew that her dreams would never come true. The wedding day came and the prince married his princess. In the evening there was a big celebration on his ship, much like the one the Little Mermaid had watched on her 15th birthday from afar. This time she was on board and joined in the dancing, even though it was agony for her, and she knew that in the morning she would be gone forever. Eventually the prince and his bride went to bed and the ship grew quiet. As the Little Mermaid sat looking out to sea, she saw her 5 sisters rise up through the waves. They no longer had their beautiful hair, for they had allowed the sea witch to cut it off in exchange for a magical dagger. They gave the dagger to the Little Mermaid and told her to plunge it into the prince's heart and bathe her feet in his blood. If she did this, her tail would come back, and she could return to her home under the sea, where her father, grandmother and sisters were grieving for her. They warned her that she would need to do the deed before dawn, or it would be too late. With that they turned tails and disappeared under the waves. The mermaid took the little dagger and went to where the prince was sleeping with his bride. But when she saw him, she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she kissed him and threw the dagger into the sea. Taking one more look at the prince, she threw herself off the ship and into the waves, where she felt her body dissolving into foam. And that's a true story. Sea Witch all finished. I'm really happy with how she turned out. I think if you crossed Miss Havisham with a Barbie and a mackerel, I definitely used some images of mackerel as my inspiration for colour and shape, and yeah, love how that Pebio paint turned out. camera isn't really doing it justice. You can get some idea, but yeah, I love that. I'm so glad I broke that out. I was really happy with the crown as well, with the copper wire and that verdigris effect embossing powder. So yeah, so she's holding her potion. Everything's too shiny for my camera to want to focus. There we go. I sort of distressed the jar up with antiquing paste and paint and all sorts of things. So yeah, that's got her black blood in it and some other secret ingredients. She's wearing her rags that look like they might be old bits of sails from shipwrecks and treasures that she's found on the seabed, or that she's taken in exchange for her spells. So there's lots of little meaningful things on her jewels here. So these are pearls with tiny shells. I had some of them in my miniature kit. I'm trying to get that to focus. Then there's a little charm here in the shape of a fish. There's a little padlock. She's also got a key. There's another shell there. And this one, you might have noticed I did film a bit of that. I cannot get it to focus. But that's her own severed finger. There we go, it's focusing now. That's her own severed finger. Which she's wearing on a chain around her neck, so it's come from this hand here. There is a story that one way to gain magical powers is to have her bone broken, to make a sacrifice of part of yourself. So yes, that was her sacrifice to get her powers. I've in the end kept her hair looking still kind of beautiful. It's like, well, it's a bit wild, but that could just be that it's floating in the water. Because as you will have heard by now, at the end of the story, she does take the hair of the 5 sisters, and yeah, she did used to be a beautiful mermaid herself once. She's developed quite a little backstory for me as I've been working on her. I'm sort of wondering if I can give you a better look. Yeah, I feel like she looks, I'm going to take some photos and put on at the end as well. I do feel like she looks better in real life than I can show on camera at the moment. But yeah, I'm really pleased with how she turned out. Really pleased. It's the first time I've done anything like that, so yeah, it was more than a Barbie makeover this time. Really, the Barbie just ended up being the armature. Her hair's the only recognisable bit left. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll probably have another one for you tomorrow. I've got so many ideas for this collaboration. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you again really soon. Bye.